You know, Alan, there are a lot of people, young and old, who do not really know the American story.
Well, can we finish this up because I'm gonna go on TikTok and I just want to watch videos. It's
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem. Hey, what's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another episode of the Sons of History podcast. I am Dustin Bass. I was about to come up with a different name, but go ahead.
I'm the talent Alan Joaquim.
Oh, talent.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, you should write the word out talent, but Talant.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
No. Anyways, all right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we've got a very special guest on the show, Wilfred McClay. I'm excited about this one. I am thrilled that we got him on the show, and I cannot wait to have the conversation with him. But before we do, as we always do,
Is that the This Week in History?
all right, so my This Week in History actually took place November 18th, 1978.
Fine, you do that, and
Yeah,
I'm going to talk
exactly.
about this other one that I see listed.
Of course. All right, so my choice is November 19th, 1863. It is a famous moment in American history that I think everybody will identify once I get that burp out from my apple cider, hot apple cider, which is what I'm having. What did you have? Coffee?
I just had coffee. Why didn't you tell me you had apple cider? I would have.
Because you brought your own coffee and
Because you complain
creamer.
every time I drink up all your
I don't
creamer.
mind you. Yeah, the creamer. Yeah, you drink up all the cream. And it's stupid. It's like, don't even have coffee. Why don't you just go to Whataburger and get a milkshake? Yeah, okay, then go do that.
Well, listen. If I'm gonna drink
All right,
something,
I'm moving on. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. And that is the great Gettysburg address given by Abraham Lincoln, and it was relatively shortly after the Battle of Gettysburg that took place the beginning of July. And it's interesting that he gave a 2-minute speech. Well, look who decided to show up. He gave a 2-minute speech, and the guy who went before him, this was Edward Everett of Massachusetts, he spoke for 2 hours. And guess which one we remember most fondly?
I never even
The
heard
2-minute
of.
speech.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So I think it just goes to show it's not so much how long you say it, it's what you say.
Well, it's kind of reminds me of who went before and after the Beatles in what was that theater? Oh God, I was going to say Edward R. Murrow, and now you got your dog licking me.
Get out of here.
Ed Sullivan Show. Nobody remembers.
No one knows.
No. What is up with this dog?
Go on. Get.
All right. Now,
Sit.
Yes, sit so that I can tell people my This Week in History, which was on November the 18th of 1978. And, funny thing is, I remember it. I remember when this came out because it was huge news.
Yep.
Absolutely huge news. It's
yeah.
a story of the Jim Jones massacre, or Jonestown massacre, I should say. Now, Jim Jones, the Reverend Jim Jones, he started off as a pretty decent guy and, as a minister. And, he ministered to a lot of poor people. And over time, he kind of got heavily involved in some of the anti-racist movement, which was a good thing at the time. I mean, it still is, but at the time, it wasn't very you know, correct for many people to do that. But he did it, and he was very gutsy for it. But during that time, he kind of lost a little bit of his, faith, and he ended up becoming an atheist, believe it or not. But he saw himself as a reincarnation of Jesus Christ and Vladimir Lenin. He became a Marxist, an actual Marxist.
So the combination of Jesus and Vladimir?
Well, what's funny is that a lot of people say Jesus was a socialist, which is a pretty stupid comment because I don't think
It's just so.
when you think of like the talents. But anyway,
I know,
that's
another.
anyway. Okay, so what happened was is that he moved his church to San Francisco, and then eventually he moved his church to the South American country of Guyana. And he created his own little town in the very northern part of the country, and they called it the People's Temple Agricultural Project, aka Jonestown, named after him, of course. There were about 1,000 followers, but it wasn't quite the paradise people thought it was. It was kind of like a modern day type of slavery. Now, there was a congressman by the name of Leo Ryan. A lot of his people came from, that part of California that were living in Jonestown. So he kept hearing about complaints that were going on from family members, people who defected, family members of those that were still there. So he formed a little delegation of his staff, NBC News. You had reporters. It was like the San Francisco Chronicle, Washington Examiner, Washington Post. They flew down to see what was really going on in Jonestown. Now, at the beginning, he only allowed just a few people, but then he allowed the reporters in. They flew to an airstrip about 6 miles from there, and then tractor trailer into the jungle. Few people, like I said, a few people were able to go in there. And then Jim Jones was like, okay, he'll let the reporters in. So the reporters interviewed him, and there were people that were passing messages to the reporters trying to get it to Congressman Ryan, get me the hell out of here. So there were about 15 people who said that they wanted to leave. Jim Jones was like, if you want to leave, go, because you're not one of us anyway. So they piled into a tractor trailer or tractor rather, and went back through the jungle to the airstrip. Now, Jim Jones, what he did was he allowed some of his little red brigades, which was kind of like the Praetorian Guard, they followed them out there. There were 2 planes waiting for them on the airstrip, and as they were about to get on the planes, one of the 15 defectors pulled out a gun and just started shooting everybody. And right around that time, there was, a the tractor showed up, and members of the Red Brigades just jumped out and just started shooting everybody also. There was an NBC News cameraman who caught the beginning stages of the shooting. The video still exists, but there were, 5 members were killed and quite a few injuries, but everybody just scattered into the jungle. Now, one of the planes did manage to take off, and they flew to Georgetown. So when those Red Brigades members went back and told Jim Jones what had happened,
Okay.
when they went back and told him what had happened,
But is that okay? So they went to where did they go? Georgetown.
the survivors, there were a couple of survivors because there were 2 planes that Ryan's delegation.
But they went to Georgetown.
Yeah, they flew. They took off. They were
Is
able
that
to.
like-
They were able to escape. There were 2
Was
planes.
that George Jones?
No, there was Georgetown, which was the capital of Guyana, and then there's Jonestown. Georgetown,
Jones.
huh?
George Jones.
No, funny.
Yeah.
Too soon. It's too soon to make jokes about that. So no, they flew to the capital of Guyana, Georgetown. They managed to escape. So the Red Brigades went back, told Jim Jones what happened, that some of the members escaped, and Jim was like, okay, we're over it. It's over for us. So what they did was it wasn't Kool-Aid. A lot of people think it was Kool-Aid, but it was a grape flavor aid. They got like a big bucket or big barrel of it, and they put Valium and cyanide. they put it in with the Flavor Aid. And then Jim Jones called everyone to the pavilion for an assembly and told them what had happened, that, there were a lot of deaths, people were killed. Now they're going to come after us. It's over for us. So we're going to do a revolutionary suicide. Now there's a 45-minute audio tape of this where people were arguing. But lines were formed, armed guards surrounded the crowd, and everybody started either injecting the Flavor Aid or they drank it. About 909 people died. Mass suicide. It was like the worst suicide murders up until 9/11. Yeah. But Jim Jones, he ate a bullet, killed himself with a gun, and that's where drinking the
Jones actually came in.
Yeah, what you can't make fun of.
Loving her.
But this is where the saying "drinking the Kool-Aid."
Yeah. You don't want to do it.
It was
all right.
Kind of
well, thanks, man.
Thing, but,
yeah, I think you said that one in record time too.
Did I?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's a very uplifting
we always
story.
always.
But like I said, I remember when this happened. It was like
wow. It feels like I've relived it.
Yeah. So, well,
thanks.
Anytime.
Appreciate it. All right. Thanks for your rendition of the great Jim Jones.
Hey, more people died in the Civil War, man. So
why don't you take the Jim Jones poster out of your room, huh? Because everything that you just said makes it seem like you don't really care and that this is all a joke to you. People died.
All
right. That's This Week in History. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've got Wilfred McClay. He is going to be joining us, and just a little rundown of who he is. He is the former G.T. and Libby Blankenship Chair in the History of Liberty at the University of Oklahoma and the director of the Center for the History of Liberty. He is now member of the U.S. Commission on the Semi-Quincentennial, which has been charged with planning the celebration of the nation's 250th birthday in 2026. Hopefully we make it that long with what's going on in this country. He is now the Victor Davis Hanson Chair in Classical History and Western Civilization over at Hillsdale College in Hillsdale, Michigan. And he is the author. You do this. You're so good at it. He is the author of the book, Land of Hope, an invitation to the great American story. And that is one of the things that we're going to be talking about with him. And so without further ado, we've got Wilfred McClay, who has told me, hey, just call me Bill, or don't call me like doctor. Don't, let's not get all, he's a little bit like Dr. Stephen Hart. And he's like, just call me Stephen, So we've got Bill on the line. Bill, how are you doing?
I'm fine. It's Saturday night here in beautiful cosmopolitan Hillsdale, Michigan, and I'm watching the snow fall.
Oh, beautiful! Yeah, it's a little chilly.
Whoa. Yeah,
it's a little chilly down here in Houston, but not anywhere near that. Thank God.
Yeah.
I'm a recent immigrant to these parts, and although I'm sort of a Midwesterner by birth, I'm in Illinois. Spent most of my life on the coast, and now I'm back in the Midwest here. So I'm happy to do it.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I know we're big fans of Hillsdale College and everything that they're doing. So it's pretty awesome that you're over there.
Yeah. I get a newsletter from them all the time.
Yeah, the Imprimis. Yeah.
You and 4 million almost 5 million now.
Yeah, it's growing.
It's amazing the reach of it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And speaking of Hillsdale College, your book, Land of Hope, which we're wanting to discuss among other things, you did one of the online courses for that. Fantastically done, I have to say. And if ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't checked that out, you need to go check out Hillsdale College. I think it's hillsdale.edu, and then check out their online courses. And go with
they are free. They
are free.
Absolutely free.
And
the only thing you have to deal with is Hillsdale's incessant fundraising, please. But I think you can actually unsubscribe to that. So, but yeah, the courses are free, and they have lots of other courses on the Bible. Victor Davis Hanson has a fantastic. It's about Second World War. Second World War is based on his book, that title.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that. And look, I can't take credit for everything about it. You know, the a lot of the art, the way it's put together, the obviously the editing, I didn't do. I just showed up and it's like in the ad business, they refer to the people who do the, you know, who appear on the screen as the talent. So I was the talent, but the really talented people were the guys, Kyle Mernon and others, and who and freelancers too. They hired really wonderful people. So it was a team effort. It really was.
Well, that's funny because that's
But I'll
what,
take all the credit. You know.
yeah, that's what Alan does. He
Yeah.
calls himself the talent, takes the credit, and I do all the work. So
Yeah, I will admit he does do all the work, but you know,
So
we kind of need each other. We're like, you know, the shark and that thing that hangs on the shark, whatever that thing is called.
I have no
The
idea.
names of those things.
Yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Haven't you seen
That's
photos
quite
of?
all right.
Haven't you seen a video of the shark and you got the thing that's attached to the shark? You haven't seen? Oh my God! Seriously, you
You
have not
talking
seen
about
it?
the tracker?
I don't know what they're called. No, there's these little animals that get on.
Oh, yeah, that's.
I don't know what they're called. I'm a
Sort of
historian.
parasites or
Yeah,
I don't know if
riders.
they're, yeah, I don't know if they're
Paras-
parasites.
Parasite fish. So they're just
Ah.
eating off their back. Yeah, that's what you're doing. You're living off my.
living the life.
Yeah.
Living the life.
Exactly. I'm just guiding the ship. So, Bill, we want to talk about your book, Land of Hope. It came out in 2019. Now, pretty much in the very beginning,
Thank
the
you,
opening.
Alan.
Yeah,
Good man.
He loves it. This is when we say talent,
Yeah.
this is what we're talking about. He used to be on Wheel of Fortune, and then Vanna White, she showed up, and so he was
It's
booted
hard
off.
to compete with Vanna White.
It's tough. It's
Yeah,
not
they
easy.
called me a
By the
Lana.
way, you know, apropos of Wheel of Fortune, you know who is the chairman of the board at Hillsdale College?
Yeah, yeah, the guy who is the main guy,
Pat Sajak.
Sajak.
Pat
Yeah,
Sajak.
yeah.
I did not know
And he's
that.
great. He's really, really terrific. I mean, it is totally tuned into the issues in higher education and what's really special about Hillsdale. I mean, we're lucky to have him. There's a story that, see, we're about 2 hours from the Detroit airport, which is a bit of a hike. And there is a Hillsdale airport. And I'm told that they lengthened the runway so that Pat Sajak's jet could land there. I don't know that that's true. I probably shouldn't be saying this, but it would be worthwhile. He's that good, worthwhile to do that.
Well, yeah, I think he'll forgive you. And I guess, that might be a good idea to pick the next online course for Hillsdale College is just spin the wheel, whichever it lands on. Well, looks like we're doing this one, Frederick Douglass. I don't know. Anyways.
I can give you off the air some recommendations on that because there's a couple of them just come out that I think one guy in particular I think would be an absolutely a hoot for you to interview.
Oh, that'd be great.
But now it's my turn to be a hoot. So
Exactly.
let's
Yeah. And we're starting off with a couple of hoots. Hey, so the beginning of your book, it starts off and you pose the question, why the need for this book, referencing Land of Hope. And your answer more or less seems to revolve around citizenship. I got to ask, what is it about your history textbook, Land of Hope, what is it about that book that it gets right? And what is it about many of the other textbooks and for history that gets wrong? The things that it gets wrong.
Well, I think it's mostly that I've been very selective. This is a 400-page book that covers all of American history, although not the very recent American history, and that was a deliberate decision on my part. But still, there's a lot of material to cover, and I really wrote it to be a kind of textbook for my ideal reader. You always think of your ideal reader in your writing, and my ideal reader was a junior in high school, a guy preferably, but it doesn't have to be a guy. But who's preparing to take AP US history and needs something that's going to pull it all together. And I don't know whether it hasn't yet. The book has found an audience. It's sold, just unbelievable for me anyway. I mean, I'm a college professor. I'm used to having books sell, 5,000 copies. It's a great triumph. So we've sold a lot more than that. But the interesting thing is that most of the readers up to now have been not in schools, but adults, people your age, and older. I'd say anybody 30, 35 and up. That's kind of been my readership so far. That's really curious. And why is that? I think part of it is that people have a real hunger for something like that. They have a hunger for someone who has some knowledge, some authority, saying, giving an account of the country that it's saying, in the first place, we've got some flaws, but all in all, it's a pretty great story, and here it is. So if I had written a sort of Valentine to America, I don't want that. They don't want sugar coated. But the problem with the current textbooks is that they are there's no sweetness at all, and they're also too crowded with. I think that's as much as the other, that they're not well written because they're sort of assembled to have a little bit of everything in there. But anyway, to get back to your question, what do I get right, and what does it have to do with citizens? I think I made the decision to political history of the country. That's a kind of unusual choice these days for a historian to make, because professional historians, at least for the last 30, 40 years, have been much more concerned with social history, with anything but political history or constitutional history or diplomatic history. Those are all, and military history. Those four fields, maybe intellectual history, kind of fallen by the wayside. What does a young person need to know about his or her country to kind of sally forth into the world and have a sense to be an American citizen? That was a question I always asked myself. So, for example, there's a lot of attention paid to the origins of the Constitution, not just the Constitution itself, but to the kinds of historical differences within the prehistory of America, history of England in the 17th century and so on, that all of these things that help make sense of why the Constitution is structured and what, as a citizen, you need to know about. So that's kind of what I think has made my book a little bit different. It's much more sort of slimmed down. There's a lot of detail that drops out. That's very hard, especially when it's a subject and there are lots of areas of American history I don't know much about, but there are areas I didn't know a lot about. And you probably couldn't tell from the book which is which, because I went through this process of, it's just kind of triage, throwing out anything I thought didn't contribute to sort of fundamental basic comprehension. One other thing is that I really do think we have a story. There's an American story. It isn't, we don't all agree on all the details of it. But there is a great American story. And I think that is lost in the, modern day textbooks. They're just this profusion of detail that are really meant to kind of try to keep up with the combination of the, what people in the profession are studying and what the textbook committees and the interest groups that affect textbook committees, Texas being an example of that, are demanding. So these things aren't actually written by people. It's kind of horrifying. I have a friend who used to work for Pearson, and she is threatening to write an article. I wish you would, about exactly what happens in the making of a textbook, because she saw it and participated in it. It's makes sausage look like purity itself by comparison, sausage making. So this is a book, one person wrote it. I wrote it at night. Didn't even take a leave of absence or anything like that. No research assistance. I just wrote it. So it does represent, for better or worse, one person's view. But I also think that a lot of people appreciate. I don't try to pretend that I'm God, and that I'm presenting as a sort of God's eye view of American history. So I think all of these things are factors in why the book has been well received, much better than I expected. I expected a rockier reception than I got, and I'm not sure why that is, but I'm glad of it.
It's interesting because I was thinking the same word that you said is there is a hunger. There is a hunger for the retelling of the American story in its proper context, in its broad proper context that sort of ties a lot of things together. And I know that we had mentioned that before we started recording, and I think that that's something that happened. Now, it's interesting. Victor Davis Hanson has mentioned that a number of times. How kids are in school, they don't like history class, but now you've got history books coming out all of the time, and it's one of the biggest sellers as far as genres go for books. And I think that is indicative of why people our age and older are interested in your book and books like it. But I also think it's an indictment on the public or the education system, which leads actually perfectly to my next question. Is over the past number of years, it's funny, we were talking about this book came out in 2019, and a whole hell of a lot has taken place since 2019. And it seems that we are sort of, the past number of years has shown the fruits of poor history and civics education, primarily, especially in public education. What have you noticed that the education system is getting wrong about teaching history and civics?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's partly it doesn't there's not a sense of perspective. That is, I think it's really important for kids to learn about slavery, about slavery, indentured servitude, the whole and racism and its relationship to those things, and it it's I think it's really important for them to look at, to be aware of the negative in American history. But what we really don't seem to have is a perspective on it. I can't tell you how many, mostly people my age, when I decided to take this on and I told people about it, first thing they would ask me, well, how are you going to deal with Indian removal? How are you going to deal with that aspect of slavery? And well, these are important things, but it's not the totality. It's really I don't want to say it's a footnote, but it's not the central story. And the central story is not being told in the parts of it, including the negative parts that need to be rendered, they're not being integrated into the whole in a way that makes any sense. So a lot of kids are just learning that there are three important things about history: slavery, Indian removal, and Japanese internment camps, and that's all they know about. And they don't know. My students, even at OU, where I had very good students, undergraduate students, that they are shocked when I say, for example, that slavery has been more the rule than the exception in human societies over the course of the history where we have records, and uh, um, they're shocked. They're shocked. They really think the United States is the only nation in human history that's. They may have some vague notion the Romans had slaves, but that was different. They were maybe captured in battle, and they weren't really slaves. Um, they're and then the thing that really astonishes them is when you say, well, slavery has not been abolished. Slavery is thriving right now. By the UN's count, which probably undercounts it, 23 million enslaved people in the world, in Africa and Asia, various other places, and you could even count trafficked individuals in the West. Part of that, you could count the Uyghurs and other enslaved Chinese who are providing much of the labor for our cornucopia of consumer goods that are now sitting off the coast of Long Beach and Los Angeles Harbor. But for us to obsess about one of the things that's happened since the book was published, the 1619 Project, for us to obsess about what may or may not have happened and try to construct a narrative of that as the actual founding of America, which is an absurd idea, it is such a misallocation of our psychological energy. We really, and I'm a historian, I believe in the importance of the past, but good Lord, I think part of understanding America and appreciating America is being able to answer the compared to what question. To compare America to a perfect paragon, standard of virtue that is unexcelled. There is no slavery, no oppression, no structural inequalities, blah, blah, blah. We're going to fall short. But if you compare things like receptivity to immigration and any number of other standards of just fundamental freedoms, we score very high. And this is one reason why immigrants are such, by and large, such boosters of America, because they know. I just had lunch yesterday with a guy who's joined the faculty here, who's really a refugee from Venezuela, and he is utterly fed up with the criticisms of America that he hears from people. Not so much around here, but he was at Columbia for a number of years in New York, and he says people just don't. They have no idea. Have no idea what it was like to live under Chavez and Maduro, and he's come to this country, flat broke. Wife doesn't speak English, and yet, he's a Yankee Doodle dandy. He really is. He is inspiring in talking about what's great about the country, and that's why do so many people want to come here, even now, even with all of our despicable racism and so on that the world attributes to us. They know better. They know this is still a land of hope, and I fear it's sounding like a cornball when I say these things, but I think again, when you talk to people who come from terrible situations in today's world and for whom this country represents a real asylum, a real chance to start their lives over, it doesn't seem so corny, and it seems that something that we are being rather narcissistic and solipsistic to fail to appreciate what we are and what we represent in a positive way to so much of the world.
It's funny that you say that about the immigrants being the boosters of this country, because some of the most fiercest patriotic people that I have met are people who came from Cuba or Haiti, Venezuela, and the worst people that I've had to deal with are those that grew up in this country who are complaining because their iPhone isn't as fast as it should be, or nothing but complaints, and like we were talking about the slave. You were talking about the slavery issue, where I would mention that China, India, and those regions had far more slavery than the United States ever did, and immediately being accused of a white supremacist. Where'd you get your information from? A white supremacist? And I'm like, no, I got it from Dr. Thomas Sowell, who is an African American. So, kind of,
I was
but
so
then,
close to being like, the Larry Elder thing. It's such a
yeah,
freaking
yeah. So
scam.
it's ridiculous. But that
No,
leads me.
and a tiny percentage um, of the African the slave trade to North America, or well, to the Western Hemisphere, I should say. Only a tiny percentage. I think it's in the single digits. I actually think it's 3%, but I don't quote me on that. But it's in the single digits. Percentage of that came to what became the United States. Huge percentage of it went to the Sugar Islands and to Brazil, where you had a very high rate of mortality in both of those areas. And in the United States, conditions were so relatively good that after 1808, when the slave trade was abolished, they didn't need it. They had natural reproduction, natural growth of the African slave population. And look, I mean, that's a hard thing to say in a public setting. Well, the slavery in America was so much better. I mean, it's slavery still, and it was brutal in many, many places. Um, uh, and tremendous variety. And to the people who've actually studied it, always emphasize this: that slavery is so different in different places and different time periods. But that raw number of how many of the West Africans who came to the Western Hemisphere went to North America, to what became the United States, that really does tell you something important. It never gets talked about, except people who study Brazilian history know about it. Yes, and slavery in the Arab world, you don't talk about that either. It's come because we actually hold ourselves to such a high moral standard, and are quite willing to and see it as a kind of moral requirement to engage in self. We often don't even get past criticizing ourselves to look at how we compare to other nations of the world, and that's. I often felt that if you do it, to teach American history course starting with reading the Gulag Archipelago or something like that, that would really immerse students in the realization of what and what a brutal business human history has been for the most part. I mean, we all enjoy reading about it, but we don't enjoy the idea of living in a society where human sacrifice is practiced. This is not this is the world that Columbus came to replace. And he was brutal at times in his own way. That's part of the record. But that compared to what question is something I ask all the time. When our students are kind of getting the sense that they're engaging in historical thinking and critical thinking when they're comparing the United States to an abstract standard of moral perfection. And I always want to say, okay, tell me another society in which women had a better status in the 1830s than they did in the United States. And they don't have the slightest idea. They're not really interested in knowing. They're interested in having a kind of cudgel to beat their country with. This is the part I don't completely understand, is I don't know why we've come to a place where the hatred, if that's not too strong a word, of our own is almost treated as a moral imperative. I certainly see it in the university world that I live in, that the idea of writing anything that's sort of affirmative of America is almost beyond the pale. And how does that happen? What's that all about? Why is this sort of self-loathing or a projection onto others of guilt or whatever? Why does this happen? I wish I understood it better, but I don't.
Well, do you think that the retelling of America's story is focused so heavily on the negative that Americans are just going to view it negatively? And if so, how do we correct this? How, as a citizen, can we turn the tide?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that in a global, in a big picture sort of way. I've just tried to do my little bit in well, let me tell you the story of how Land of Hope came to be, and that might illuminate your question, the answer to your question a little bit. This started in 2014. Um, the College Board, which is the organization that administers advanced placement testing, um, came out with a new set of guidelines for the AP US History test, and which is kind of the gold standard in in the educational world of standardized testing. Um, and they had radically changed what had always been a down the middle kind of test, reliably neutral. Uh, and they emphasized the slave trade. They emphasized the sort of development of the Atlantic world economy around the economics of slavery and the triangle trade and so on. Um, they de-emphasized the founding. There wasn't a unit on the Constitution or on the ratification debates of the Constitution. There wasn't even a mention in the document of George Washington, James Madison. I could go on, but you get the idea. Scrubbing that was administered, and there's a lot of other things I could say about what the college, none of which are good, but um, a group of us, and I actually was the Thomas Jefferson of the group, and I wrote an open letter to the college. We put out, and you can still see it on the website of the National Association of Scholars, a letter sort of pleading with the College Board to change back to the earlier standards. They never acknowledged the letter. They never even acknowledged it, but they did move their standards back for the most part. And a lot of people, Dan Henninger at the Wall Street Journal wrote a great column saying, well, okay, you won, now shut up. Not to me, but to conservatives who were complaining. Well, here's the problem. All the textbooks, there are three major textbooks publishers. They all had already revised their textbooks in light of the new standard. So people started in circles of sane historians. We generally meet in a phone booth, but not that. We started talking about what are we going to do, and a couple of people said, well, we really need to have an alternative textbook. And I said, that's right. I hope you find somebody to do it. And then as people started asking me if I was interested, because there's no reward within the historical profession for doing something like this. And I knew I would pay a price professionally. But finally, I was talked into doing it. And once I got into it, I couldn't stop because I loved it. I loved what I was doing, something I knew needed. So that's how it happened. It really was created as a counter to, and that's why I said I thought of it as a book that someone who was doing the AP test, preparing for the AP, uses as a pull it all together kind of. But it's sort of taken on a life of its own, in completely independent. But I think it's things like the AP test reflect and the changes of it You should see the European history test. They've made similar changes, and there was no comparable outcry. And so, as far as I know, it's still going along as it was. It's pretty dreadful. It doesn't um, it doesn't take into account the distinctives of the West, of the Western civilization. It's focuses on negative, a lot of negatives. It's not completely negative, but I'd say it's more negative than something I want to share with you too is that thinking about when I talk about good citizens and all that. I didn't think a lot about this when I was writing it because actually the information had not become available. I've been haunted by these statistics that I've seen about youth suicide. You've probably seen some too. That there's a statistic in it. Young people between the age, I think, of 14 and 25 or something like that. The rate of suicide has increased 60% in the last 10 years. And look, I don't think they're doing it because they're having to read horrible textbooks. But I do think that it's a contributing factor to a kind of demoralization of a whole generation. I have kids, they don't experience this, but I see it a lot. I see aim over, one's country, one's race, one's whatever, one's privilege. That this is and I'm not saying people are committing suicide just for that reason, but what I am saying is that the morale of the millennials and the generation behind them, like I said, with the Zoomers or whatever they're called, is very low. I can't help but think that the notion that they live in a country that rests on the basis of ill-gotten wealth, in which the opportunities of the past are no longer available to them, that this is a contributing factor. I think it has an effect on your soul if you grow up in a society where you're taught that you live under a regime that is unworthy. So, and if I believed that was the truth, I would have to either say it or shut up. But I don't believe it's the truth. I absolutely don't believe it's the truth. And so it's incumbent upon me to try to do something. And I have to say, there are times when I go to bed with a smile on my face because I've gotten 3 emails from total strangers who've said, "I just read your book and I loved." So, and I get this all the time. I've never had this for anything else that I've written, and it's kind of fun, but it's very gratifying. I feel like I'm doing some good in the world.
Well, let me ask you, how do you respond to a critic of America or even your book? Because they'll sit and say, well, our founding fathers, our founding documents like the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, our Republican form of government. What's the big deal? Why is that so special? Because, we have democracies all over the world right now, and people are happier in Nordic countries. I mean, what's
Yeah, I don't know that that's true. Talking about suicide rates, Sweden and Norway led the world. I don't know that's no longer true. And those are particularly Sweden, a very unhappy place right now because they unwisely accepted a lot of immigration of people that are finding to be completely unassimilable. That's one thing about us. You look at the French, you look at even the British, and certainly the Scandinavians, any number of other countries, the Germans with their Turkish population. We do an amazing job in assimilation. We're not doing as well as we used to because we have policies that are opposed to assimilation. We have a multilingual and multicultural kind of education in the schools that we no longer accept the idea that Americanization is a noble thing because it puts people in a position where they can flourish in this country. They know the language, they know the way that um, it and yet, among the most, you were talking about immigrant patriots. I always find when I'm in New York that I manage to get cab drivers who are real Yankee Doodle dandies, even though they're from Eritrea or or Pakistan uh, and they understand how the economy works. They don't really get the system, but as cab drivers in New York, which is an incredibly stressful, competitive business, they get it and they love it, and they don't they don't like De Blasio, but they love the country, um, and so I think people can pick it up. We should be teaching our young people to really appropriate uh, the good things about our past. I'm getting back to the Nordic, because I do think that there's an apples and oranges aspect to the comparison. It, we have to have an economy that can support the defense of much of the rest of the world. Western Europe, they don't pay for their own defense, and curiously, they're very critical of us. But when we start talking about like pulling our troops out of Germany, oh my goodness, no heavens! But we are we have an economy that's supporting a lot of the world beyond ourselves. Um, we we have bailed out Europe um, twice in the last century. Um, we didn't do so well toward the end of that century, uh, but even Vietnam arguably is an instance in which the United States came into the vacuum the French had left um, by their imperial. Um, we've done just we've done things for the rest of the Western world, and not just the Western, that you can't find any analog in what they've done for us or for anybody else. Um, now, it may be that living in Switzerland, which is it's my idea of a really nice country with great landscape, but it may be nice to live in Switzerland. Many things I admire the canton system, admire the traditional folk. But Switzerland hasn't gone to war for anybody's sake in a long time. Uh, and again, we have, we have, um, we have bodies of American soldiers all over the place. And I went not long ago to Cambridge, England. There's a wonderful cemetery maintained by the U.S. government, dedicated to all the airmen who lost their lives. Um, that's part of our story, and I don't know whether young people know that. Um, I went to Italy right at the height of I was there as a Fulbright professor, right at the height of the Iraq War, when it was very controversial. And we had just moved into our apartment, street shopping, and an elderly Italian woman came up to me and asked me if I would reach up a shelf for her for something she couldn't reach, and I did, and gave it. I see it. Then her husband, up in English, says, "We love America." I hadn't said I was an American. I hadn't said a word in English. I had said it in my terrible Italian, um, but he said, we love America. And I said, thank you. And I think he intuited that I was feeling some of all the criticism getting over the Iraq, really bogged down. And he said, uh, I don't know what young people will tell you, but we, and he's gesturing to his wife, we will never forget what you did for us. Well, our young people have forgotten it, if they ever knew it. So, these are important things, and they don't just come by osmosis. They have to be taught. That they have to be sort of become memory, but they're sort of collective memory that have to absorb by being taught, by hearing the stories. So I hope more of that can happen. I hope we can. My book begins with the epigraph. The quotation at the beginning of a book. It starts with a quote from John Dos Passos, and I've told people, if you don't read the book, read the epigraph, because it's so beautiful. And Dos Passos, as you probably know, you guys know this kind of very, very radical leftist, really a communist in the 20s, and the time of the Sacco Vanzetti case, and he was involved in the Spanish Civil War. And at some point, I forget the exact details, but he moved to the right, for a number of factors. But and it's in 1941, he wrote this essay called "The Uses of the Past," and I quote from that essay. And it's a beautiful essay. But one of the things he says that's in the epigraph is, history is a sort of fun thing, cosmetic, I think is the word he used, I think, during peaceful times. But in hard times, history is a lifeline. He says it's a life, that I actually, I have it handy.
There you go.
Yeah, in times of change and danger, when there's a quicksand of fear under men's reasoning, a sense of continuity with generations gone before can stretch like a lifeline across the scary present and get us past that idiot delusion of the exceptional now that blocks good thinking. That's why in times like ours, when old institutions are caving in and being replaced by new institutions, not necessarily in accord with most men's preconceived hope, political thought has to look backwards as well as forwards. I just think that's so great. It's so relevant to right now. People are, I mean, they think this is the worst time ever in American history, that we're more divided than we've ever been. More divided than the Civil War, but we've always had division. And some of them have been profound. 1941, when Dos Passos wrote that, the country was divided, fiercely divided over whether or not to get involved. This is early 41. This is not after Pearl Harbor. Division disappeared. But, so we've had very difficult, and it does. The rest, I didn't read you all the quote. The rest of the quote deals with kind of how, looking at the examples of the past, how helpful it can be. And I think one of the things that my students need to get over is this, what he calls the idiot delusion of the exceptional now, meaning that we are living in such a time that has no, we all have this, and that changes everything. Now, there's no way I can relate to my 30s or whatever. We live in a totally different world. digital revolution. Um, and that's crap. Human nature doesn't change. Many things don't change. Um, we're finding out that modern monetary theory doesn't change the nature of inflation. Uh, uh, there's a way in which the inability to remember the past it does cause us to repeat mistakes. But um, but more it's just that sense of connection. When I mentioned to you guys in the warm up that I was born in, I used to go back in the summers to visit my grandmother with my family, and this was in Charleston, Illinois. I don't know whether you probably don't have any contact with that, but Charleston happens to be one of the places where there was a Lincoln Douglas debate, and I was a kid, maybe 7, 8 years old. I knew a little bit about Lincoln. I just remember wandering out this field at the Polk County Fairgrounds and coming across this plaque that says something. This is the Lincoln Douglas debate in whatever year it was whatever date it was 1858, was held here, and it kind of blew my mind. I mean, I had this sort of vertigo, this sense of, wow, I'm standing in a place where this happened. Abraham Lincoln was here, Stephen A. Douglas was here, the crowd here, they were debating for the and historic, momentous day. And I felt a sense of connection to that. It's not just a cognitive thing, it's a sense of belonging to the same entity in which that occurred. I'm still riding in the same horse or sailing in the same ship.
Bill, it's a lot of like what you've said. It's very poignant and just it's very matter of fact. It is what is going on in the world today, and we're seeing it. This is no longer under the surface in schools where you're sort of hearing about it. It's happening, and now we're seeing the fruits of it. And I think that's why your book is, and that's why we wanted to have you on the show. Is like your book is so important, and what you're saying, what you've written, and it comes down to yes, pulling your weight, doing what you can to sort of help right the ship, and get us back to viewing the American story in its proper context. So we want to just say thank you from both of us as a history show, but for what you've contributed to the American story and its retelling.
Well, thank you. It's really a pleasure. I'm so inspired that you guys are doing this. Of course, I hope you're getting rich off. But
we're working on it.
Yeah, but it and that's perfectly consistent with the being a great American. But seriously, no, I know that this is not you could be doing other things, but this is something you love. You love history, you love the subject matter, and I presume you don't only do things on American history, and that's great, because you can't really appreciate American history if you don't know anything about the rest of the world.
Well, Bill, thank you again so much for being on the show. We greatly enjoyed talking to you.
I appreciate it, and I'm going to go down and eat some lamb.
Yeah, I was going to say that lamb's not going to eat itself, man.
No, I hope not. We're in a different universe if that starts happening.
Exactly.
All right. Well, bless you guys, and stay cool down there in Houston.
We're gonna do what we can. Yeah.
I think
I'll stay warm up here.
You better believe it. All right. Take care, Bill. Have a good one.
Bye-bye. If you get up this way, drop in and see us at Hillsdale. It's a wonderfully friendly place. People will love what you're doing.
Oh, absolutely.
Seriously. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to run. The lamb is baying at me. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
You got it. See you later, Bill. Have a good one.
God bless your enterprise.
You got it.
Well, I got to say, I really enjoyed that interview.
Mm-hmm.
And, with all the things that we are watching around the country where parents are, you know, going to these school board meetings
Yeah.
and, because they're discovering what it what's being taught to our kids.
Right.
Um, I'm going to have to say that this book, Land of Hope, if you're homeschooling
Mm-hmm.
or I mean, I don't know. I really don't know how this is going to work. But if you're homeschooling or in some ways, you're going to educate your kids, I think that should replace the American history textbook that's being distributed right now.
Yeah, I think so too. And there is actually a teacher's guide and I think a student's guide that goes with this book, which would make it even easier for parents, especially if they're homeschooling. But just a great conversation. And Bill is just great. I mean, just plain and simple. He loves his country and pinpoints all the reasons why you should in this book. And so I think that, as far as book and movie recommendations go, I think obviously Land of Hope, the invitation to the great American story, not just the American story, the great American story. And I think that's like those words are in there for a reason. It's a land of hope. And when I read the book, I was thinking, it's not land of promise. Like nothing's promised to you. Nothing's going to be like, okay, this, if you come here, you will get this. You will be successful. No, it's that land of hope. Like you go there and there's always the hope that things will go well, pan out right. And look at our history of what we've done. Yeah, we've done things that, we've started off very well, but we've had things that, we needed to work out. And guess what? There was always the hope that America will make the right choice. They will make the right decision, whether that means going to war over it, or whether that means just doing some hard things. You I think there's a reason behind calling it that and the great American story. So, yeah, book and movie recommendation.
Well, I guess now we can do the movies.
Yeah.
Now, earlier I talked about the Jonestown massacre. So now there was a movie. If you want to see a movie on this, you don't want to really sit and take the time to read it. There was Powers Booth, one of my favorite actors.
All-time fave.
Yes, I loved him. Loved him in Red Dawn.
I loved him in Tombstone.
I'm trying to remember where was he in Tombstone?
He's like the main bad guy.
Oh God, what's the matter with me? He was
Wow.
Wild Bill or Bill.
Yeah.
Curly Bill. What's the matter with me? Huh?
Well,
Okay, because I hadn't seen that. I haven't watched it in a while. But yep,
what does that matter?
I need to watch. I need
you're
to
a
watch
Powers
it again.
Booth fan, go on.
Curly
Go on
Bill.
with yourself.
Anyway, okay, so in
This is hard
78
to
in 78
hear.
or 79, he came out. He played Jim Jones. He looks like Jim Jones. So he played Jim Jones. It was a made-for-TV movie called The Guyana Tragedy, the story of Jim Jones. I made the unfortunate thing of purchasing a DVD off of Amazon, and the quality. I mean, it looked like, in the 80s and 90s where, people would take a video camera into a movie theater.
Yeah.
Kind of looks like that. It's not very good quality. So be careful if you buy it. I'm just going to say maybe find it on YouTube if you see it and just watch it that way. But so good luck finding a good copy of it. Don't get the cheap one that's like for $5 because you'll regret it. But yeah, it has Powers Booth and it has I think it was Veronica Cartwright, not Angela.
Nobody knows these people.
Yes, they do. She was an alien. She was there were two women.
She wasn't Susan Sarandon.
No. Susan Sarandon.
Or whatever her name is.
That Ripley. There were two women in the movie Alien, the original Alien. She was the other one. She plays like the wife of Jim Jones. So I think she plays the wife. But
Jim Jones was an alien?
No, didn't you see the movie Alien? The one.
Of course I did.
Yeah. Okay. There were two women in that movie.
Isn't that what they were waiting on? Is it an alien spaceship?
No, you're thinking of another revolutionary suicide. That was the Hell Bop comic thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but anyway, yeah. Guyana Tragedy, story of Jim Jones, starring Powers Booth,
Starring Jim Jones.
Powers
As
Booth. So
himself.
that's
Came
a
back to
movie
life.
that I would recommend.
Yeah. Crazy. All right. Thanks for that. So I did reference Gettysburg earlier, and Gettysburg, the movie, or actually the series, the A&E series from back in the day, probably about 25 years ago, somewhere in there. Yeah, I want to say it was in the 90s, early 90s. Really good. Martin Sheen, Jeff Daniels, Tom Berenger, Sniper. It is a fantastic film.
And what's that guy with the mustache? I forget. Elliot.
Sam Elliott.
Sam Elliott's
Yeah.
in there. You know that movie is
It's
based.
just so good.
That movie is based off the book Killer Angels.
Killer Angels, yeah, which I have 2 copies of.
Yeah. I read that.
I only need one, but
Well,
yeah.
Didn't I give you one or
No, you didn't.
okay.
Anyways, but yeah,
But it's a
if
good
you've never
book.
seen Gettysburg, check that out. It is very good. You could probably purchase it somewhere online. And
It was like a 3-day
definitely
miniseries.
worth seeing. And I remember that being one of the first like TV movies I'd ever seen. So, anyways, all right, ladies and gentlemen, well, that brings our show to an end. We hope that you enjoyed it. Before we go, Alan's going to let you know what to do next.
Next is you need to go to YouTube and subscribe to our channel so that you'll get updates on our newest videos. You should get some sort of a message. But yeah, we're on YouTube. Subscribe. We're on Facebook. Like us, and we're on Instagram. Follow us. Now, if you can't seem to find us for reasons of being shadow banned or whatever that they're doing, you can find us on our very own website, www.thesonsofhistory.com.
Very exciting. Yeah.
You hear a beeping
You ever
noise?
gonna do any more writing for the Epic Times? You ever gonna put an article out there?
Yeah, well,
Maybe let people know, hey, there's more than just one Sons of History.
Well, actually, I am going to be taking a lot of days off. I have several weeks of paid vacation, which I'm going to be using these next 2 months.
Well, fantastic.
Or a month and a half, actually. So, now that I have my mom settled.
Almost gone.
Huh? Yeah.
Year's
Now that
almost
I have my mom settled, I will. I am going to be. I'm going to try to spend some time doing the writing for the Epic Times and doing some videos for the Sons of History.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, that brings our show to an end. We will chat with you next week. We've got Arthur Herman on the show, and we're going to be talking about his new book, The Viking Heart. One of my favorite authors. I know that you're going to love that conversation. I'm stoked, totally stoked about that one. So we will talk to you next week.